No, I know. And it was like, what, 4 or 5 weeks ago when we came on the air and the first racist email had just been published, basically like a half hour or 45 minutes, whatever it was, before we started the show. And now look where we are, Mike. We have a lawsuit again from a former Raider. It's just like the more things change, the more they stay the same when it comes to the NFL.
Al Davis, wherever he is, and there may be different opinions on the answer to that question, but wherever he is, he has to be smiling because John Gruden has done him proud, suing the NFL and Commissioner Roger Goodell for a variety of causes of action. We have the complaint. I've sent it to Miles. I'm sure Miles has studied it very carefully over the course of the last 45 minutes or so since he's had it. And seriously, if you have looked at it and have questions, it's the perfect opportunity to ask me. Because here's what it is. Here's what a complaint is. Civil complaint is the first document that is filed in a civil lawsuit. It initiates the process. The person who is filing the suit is seeking to change the status quo in some way, either through the payment of money or sometimes forcing someone to do something like my neighbor needs to tear down that damn fence that violates local ordinances. Whatever it is, you are trying to change the way things are by using the court system. You do it with a complaint. The paragraphs are numbered so that when the defendants to the lawsuit respond, it's all clear. There's no misunderstanding. Allegation in paragraph number 1 is this. And then eventually the defendants will say, number 1, we deny, we admit, we whatever. So it's about 21 pages, more than 100 numbered paragraphs, but I have the gist of what it's about and what it all boils down to. Now, I think that John Gruden has gone too far in a couple of areas, but what it boils down to is the idea that the Washington football team investigation generated 650,000 emails that were supposed to be secret. Somewhere along the way, someone decided to make a handful of those emails not secret, specifically to take out John Gruden. That's the key. The emails were weaponized, according to Gruden, by the league and Goodell and potential others that they don't know about yet but may become aware of later for the sole purpose of ending John Gruden's employment with the Raiders and destroying his reputation, Miles. That's the gist of it. And if this thing goes to trial, we'll learn a lot about where those emails came from, how they got leaked, who ordered the code red, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And, you know, Mike, this is something that we were talking about basically as soon as those emails came out, right? The fact that somebody had used those emails against Gruden specifically, and they had stemmed from an investigation that ostensibly had nothing to do with him. And so it's not like this absolves Gruden of him saying those things that he said in those emails. I think that, as we were saying when this first started coming out, that two things can be true at the same time. What Gruden said was wrong, okay? I mean, I think that is very, very clear. You know, it was homophobic, it was misogynistic, it was racist. It can go on and on and on, and he can talk about the bones that he does or does not have in his body. But what he said there was black and white and clear, okay? But at the same time, I think it also is fair to say that those emails were weaponized against him specifically, and we've been saying that for weeks. And not only did it interrupt John Gruden's employment, you know, in general, but it happened in the middle of the season, and it was clearly done to derail not just Gruden, but the Raiders' season in some ways. So I think that there is some merits to, as you were saying, some parts of this, and then other parts, you know, as I was reading it, it's like, okay, well, John Gruden, you got to wait a second there, because I don't know exactly if that's true with what you're saying based on everything that we already know about this situation. So it certainly is very interesting at the very least. And, you know, if this does go to trial, or if John Gruden settles it, you're going to see probably two completely different outcomes, because if it goes to trial, and it depends on how petty, or if you want to call it that John Gruden wants to be, right? Because if he just wants the money, then he can settle it and then we're done with it. But he doesn't necessarily need the money, right? John Gruden's made a lot of money. We're just coaching football and talking about football on ESPN. I mean, as it says in the lawsuit, he was one of the highest paid commentators at ESPN. So He doesn't necessarily just need the money, and he can take this as far as he wants to take it, Mike.
Well, and look, I believe that there is a way. No, I'm trying to make sure I choose my words carefully here. I believe that there is a way, on one hand, to say he got what he deserved, and on the other hand, say that he was the victim of some sort of wrongdoing that the civil legal system provides a remedy for. And I think that instead of cutting with a scalpel, his lawyers may have taken a sledgehammer and they've created the impression that maybe they're trying a little too hard to paint John Gruden as the victim. And I'll explain it very simply because it comes through in the lawsuit. This idea that the mere release of these documents in some way damaged his pristine reputation. Well, he said what he said.
Right.
Now, you can and here's what I would have argued. Here's what I would have argued. Mark Davis was not going to fire John Gruden for the contents of the emails. And the emails never should have become public. And if they had never become public, Mark Davis wouldn't have been forced to end the relationship. And Mark Davis was entitled to make the decision without any interference by the NFL in taking this information public to decide whether or not to fire John Gruden or force his resignation because of emails that were sent before he even worked for the team. And all of that information should have at all times been private and secret, and no one should have ever known that Mark Davis was even going through the motions of, do I keep him? Do I let him go? That's what Mark Davis should have been entitled to do. And I believe when Mark Davis is called to testify, Mark Davis will testify. I believe that if none of this had ever come out, he was fine with it. He would have talked to John Gruden about it. He wasn't happy with it, but he wasn't going to fire the guy for things that he wrote before he ever became coach of the Raiders, because once he became coach of the Raiders, he never did anything to suggest that that's the way he is. That, to me, has much more appeal than characterizing Gruden as one of the greatest coaches of all time, one of the most successful coaches of all time. Oh, simmer down now, Mr. Lawyer. Or Miss Lawyer. Are you sure you've researched John Gruden's full performance in the NFL as a head coach? He's underwater during his time back with the Raiders. So some of it's a little bit much. And the idea that he was entitled to continue to have this great reputation unsullied by his own words, that's where they lost me. The notion that he was entitled to have these secret communications with Bruce Allen that showed everyone who he is, that provided a window into his soul, that he was entitled for those to remain secret and his reputation to be propped up by the false perception that was otherwise out there about him. Like, basically, he was selling himself as someone who he isn't really. It was working, and how dare the NFL expose who he truly is? That's the part that bothered me.
Well, and then, I mean, you're also talking about somebody who was sending emails on a work server, right? Or, excuse me, to somebody with a work server, right? So that's why these emails even, became a part of the investigation in the first place, because he was sending them to Bruce Allen at work. And I feel like, when you're doing that, you are kind of basically giving the employer of whatever person that you're sending those emails to access to whatever it is that you're saying. And to me, that doesn't necessarily make it private. And I think a lot of what this lawsuit stems from is the fact that these were private communications. And I mean, you can say that, yes, they're not all public because not all emails are public. But when you are doing something on a work server, that work belongs then to the company. So that's basically what he did. He was allowing all of these things that he was saying to be put into Washington football team's email server, and that makes it a part of the Washington football team. So I feel like when you're arguing that, oh my gosh, he was doing these private communications between friends and then they became public, like, that doesn't negate what was in the content of those emails. And again, I think we can say that John Gruden got what he deserved based on the content of those emails, but it also, to me, makes it a little bit less private than if it was just like two dudes sending two Gmail things to each other, which again, wouldn't negate how heinous some of those words were than the images also that were shared between those folks. But it would make it different if it's not coming from work,
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And look, the only truly private communications are privileged communications between spouses, between lawyer and client, between preacher and member of congregation. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Anything you say, those become your words. And even if you trust the person who you're speaking to, that doesn't stop them from being subpoenaed unless there's a privilege. And when you write something in a technological development that is aimed at saving information, preserving information, what do you expect? So I'm uncomfortable with the idea that he had the right to say these horrible things, and that it never should have come to light and necessarily affected his reputation. Like, let's pretend these never came out, and let's view me as the guy that I was before you knew all this stuff that I wrote. I don't like that. I think that's going too far. And there's other stuff in here, too, that tells me that he may pursue the I am not a racist, or I am not a homophobe, or I am not this, I am not that, by quoting Randall Cunningham, who was the Raiders team chaplain and still is, by quoting Tim Brown, who came to his defense. Let's not litigate in this lawsuit the question of whether or not John Gruden is a racist because he said racist things. I don't think that helps him. He just needs to own the emails, and he needs to say, what I said was wrong. What I did was wrong, and I got what I deserved. However, it shouldn't have happened the way that it did. It shouldn't have come out the way that it did. The NFL violated its own internal policies. The NFL deliberately tried to squeeze one of its member teams to do what the NFL wanted. The NFL engaged in wrongdoing because, as I said, if Mark Davis was not pressured by those public leaks, Mark Davis is not firing his buddy, his pal, the Tony to his George Costanza. We've talked about that before. Doesn't matter how bad the Raiders were. They're buddies, and Mark Davis idolizes John Gruden, and he ain't firing him. And he'll find a way to keep John Gruden as the head coach unless and until these things are released and he was backed into a corner. So I got a real problem with that. And it happens. Lawyers go too far sometimes. They went too far with this. The other thing that bothers me too, Miles, is the suggestion that appears a couple of times in the 21-page lawsuit that the Gruden emails were leaked as a way for the NFL to distract from the intense public scrutiny that was arising from the Washington football team investigation. That's just wrong. That's incorrect. Yes. There was no scrutiny of the Washington football team investigation after July 1. They timed it perfectly. 5-day weekend. Here we go. By July 6th, it's all forgotten. Everybody comes to work after the 4th of July, and it never was mentioned. It only got mentioned because of the John Gruden emails. That was when 4 months later, people were like, yeah, you know what? I mean, we were all on vacation, and we were drinking a little beer, and we were shooting off fireworks, and we didn't pay much attention to this WFT investigation thing, but this doesn't look very good. It was the leak of the John Gruden emails that created the controversy. There was no controversy from which to distract. So again, you're either dealing with lawyers who don't understand how it all worked, something was lost in translation, or someone is trying to create an impression that isn't true. And that's important because, ultimately we got to address the credibility of certain people in all of this. And if you're overreaching, if you're twisting, if you're bastardizing reality, it hurts your credibility. And that suggestion really hurts the credibility of John Gruden's lawyers.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.